Celtics.
World Soccer, Canada versus Mexico in CONCACAF group play. Andres Guardado. Look at this laser off his left foot. Dang.
Oh, that is a hell of a goal.
That's pretty.
Between our two neighbors. Look at that. Where did a little upper 90? Oh, I like that. Maybe upper 80.
All right, on to the Celtics, who are in a state of flux after a disappointed season and an early playoff exit. Now, chemistry issues and locker room strife seem to hamper Boston throughout the year, and that could reportedly be traced back to Gordon Hayward. Reports are that Brad Stevens' force-feeding of his former Butler star, who was coming off that serious leg injury, bothered many of the Celtics players. So, Mannix, does Stevens deserve blame here with this situation?
So I've been kind of working on my own autopsy of the Kyrie Irving situation, and this has come up, the Gordon Hayward stuff. And then the word I've heard used repeatedly was babied when it comes to Gordon Hayward, which is kind of akin to what Jackie McMullen was talking about. Brad Stevens was in a tough spot with Gordon Hayward because, yes, Gordon Hayward probably didn't earn the minutes that he got early on. At the same time, he's coming off one of the most catastrophic injuries we've ever seen in the NBA and needed not only to have his game rebuilt, but his confidence rebuilt. So you had to give him 20, 25 minutes of time that he didn't necessarily earn to start to build that confidence back. So hopefully the idea was you have Gordon Hayward at something close to what he once was at the end of the season. That weared on some guys. I think it weared most significantly on Jaylen Brown, someone who you saw his minutes and his playing time cut back after a terrific postseason in this past year. I think it probably grated a little bit on Jason Tatum, who was in a similar situation. Look, they had 3 wings for basically 2 spots, and somebody lost minutes as a result of that. So I don't know that has anything to do with what Kyrie Irving went through last year. I think he's an entirely separate situation, but the word babied came up when it came to how Brad Stevens treated Gordon Hayward.
Well, go ahead, Sid.
I brought up before, Gordon Hayward ran into an unfortunate injury. But let's just imagine this. In a world where we don't know what the recovery time is because we don't have the Paul George injury. Say Gordon Hayward gets hurt first. Then we don't put the unrealistic expectations after we saw poor Paul George come back and be at least the player that he was and even get better. Last year, 3/4 the way through the season, Paul George is a legitimate MVP candidate. To me, Paul George, you have to be able to blame because we think every injury is the same. All right, we got unrealistic expectations for the center for Portland coming back because we've seen people come back. Like if we had seen his injury first, we'd have been like, man, his career might be over with. And when you start that way compared to, oh, this is the same injury as Paul George. Well, apples, he's an all-star, he's an all-star, but they're not. No 2 athletes are the same, and no 2 injuries are the same. So I just believe that we set an unrealistic expectation for Gordon Hayward because he deserves those 25 minutes. When you get cleared from the doctor, then you get cleared from the therapist, and you get cleared from the trainer, it's time for basketball activity. It was time for him to get on the court.
And Mannix, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was some thought, not this past season, but the season before, the season Gordon got hurt, that maybe he could come back for the playoffs. Remember, that was discussed.
That's crazy.
And then there was an infection or something they had to do. Something set him back, right?
And I remember seeing Gordon in, I think it was February or March, and the ankle, his injured ankle was still purple, which told me that he was never coming back. But that was
talked about.
And by the way, that came from, I would hear from people within the organization that wondered if they made a deep playoff run, could Gordon
Could he come back? And so you're thinking he could come back at the end of 18. So then, of course, to your point, C, you're thinking by 19, he's not going to be the exact all-star he was before, but he's going to be a quality player, and they just kept running him out there. And I know you made the point that by the end of the year, his efficiency numbers went up, and he was better as the year went on, but he was not anywhere close to the player that he had been in the playoffs. It was a tough run for everyone, especially in those last 4 games against Milwaukee. But the other thing that happened this week, I read I guess you haven't written the full Kyrie Irving autopsy yet, but you wrote, I know I read something you wrote about the Celtics at the end of the season. And you had basically in your piece talked about, okay, so Kyrie's almost assuredly leaving. here's what the team's going to look like moving forward. You, it seemed like, assumed, like the whole world did, that Al Horford was going to be a part of this team. And I'm not criticizing you. I thought the same thing. When he opted out, I was, okay, so he opts out, going to take 3 years, $65 million, something like that, get a little more cap space, get more guaranteed money. This seems to take the whole league by surprise, that Al Horford has 4 years, $100 million waiting for him somewhere. What do the Celtics do now to fill that void? Because that's the guy that you have said, Sarah Kustok has said, people close to him have said, was the most important player, the steadiest player, the most underrated player on the team. What do they do now with him walking out that door?
I wish I had a good answer for it, because that's a piece, an indispensable piece that they can't lose if they want to hope to maintain at least some regular season success. Now, there isn't any, I don't know that I completely rule out Al Horford coming back. There isn't any friction here between Al Horford and the team. Al Horford is just looking at the landscape and seeing like a facsimile of the summer of 2016, where there's all these teams out there with a boatload of cap space. 9 teams in the NBA with at least $19 million in cap space this summer. And Al Horford's looking at that and seeing, well, once the dust settles on the first tier of free agents, there are going to be teams out there. Maybe it's Brooklyn, maybe it's the Clippers, that are looking around saying, I need a player. I'll overpay Al Horford. At 33 years old, this is probably the last contract of Al Horford's career. So he wants the money. If Boston comes back and ponies up the money, I think that relationship can still be salvaged. Right now, it doesn't look great, but I don't think the door's completely closed on Al Horford. That being said, I don't know where they go after that. I don't think there's an obvious replacement for Al Horford out there in the free agent market.
Do you think Danny Ainge looks back at any of the moves or lack of moves that he has made throughout the course of this offseason or last season that he potentially regrets, or if he had a chance to do over, that he may tweak what he had done?
I mean, I've said and written before, I think Kawhi is something that stands out. Not rolling the dice on Kawhi Leonard last summer. It would have been a lower cost deal involving a Jaylen Brown and some draft picks there. That is, but I know Boston gets beat up for not making the Davis trade. I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have traded Jason Tatum to get Anthony Davis with everything we know about Davis and everything we know right now about where Kyrie Irving's going to go.
Well, just real quick on that, just follow up. But it is fair to say, I feel like as long as I've known you,
yes,
you have talked about that Boston is preparing for Anthony Davis. From 3 years ago, that they are preparing for Anthony Davis, and a guy that I think you know pretty well, I know a little bit, Bill Simmons used this analogy, I think it's a good one. Kyrie was the Jenga piece that came out, and it all fell apart. They had been preparing for it, but it was all hinging on Kyrie staying, and then they think they could convince Davis to stay. So it's not just Horford leaving and Kyrie leaving. It's their best laid plans of the assets that surrounded Anthony Davis that now you don't even make a real offer for Anthony Davis, and the Celtics are stuck in no man's land.
Right. I agree with all that, but everything kind of came apart at the seams, and I don't think the reaction should have been, let's go get Anthony Davis anyway. Even though they have been pining over this guy for the better part of 2 years, I think they did the right thing in standing pat and, I guess, living to fight another day.
All right, Mannix, we're going to see you a little bit later in the show coming up with the Lakers being overhyped. That's next on First Things First.
3 first-round picks.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Let's go.
And Yabusele, they still got him.
Get her some.